You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 68 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. We've just finished up watching the Rockets and Warriors in Game 5, and honestly, it felt like this game picked up right where Game 4 left off. But in this case, it was a reversal of Game 4. Game 4, Golden State had all the momentum, and it felt like the Golden State Warriors, I hate to use this term, but kind of gave it away. It was one they let get away. And Houston was just trying to hang in there until their opportunity arose in the fourth quarter and also the second quarter too. Now, if you look at Game 5, Golden State only managed 17 first quarter points, which is incredible when you look at the firepower that they have offensively. But they did, to their credit, they clawed all the way back to tying the game at halftime. And it actually felt a little bit like Game 6 between the Thunder and Warriors in 2016. And we were waiting for somebody to spark the Warriors' offense like Klay Thompson did in that game. Of course, remember, he set the playoff record for most threes in a game, and a lot of that came in the second half. Now, speaking of Thompson, he and Curry looked dangerous at times, but nobody really exploded and carried the offensive load. Kevin Durant finished with 29 points, but found himself holding onto the ball way too much. He also only shot 8 of 22, and Steph Curry had 22 points of 8 of 17 shooting, and Klay Thompson was 8 of 14 for his 23 points. The rest of the Warriors, had a combined 20 points from everyone else. For the Rockets, they couldn't have gotten a worse shooting night from James Harden. He had 19 points of 5 of 21 shooting, which included 0 for 11 three-pointers, and he only had 4 assists to go with 6 turnovers. He was also lost defensively away from the ball. You saw a lot of the times when the Warriors were either using Curry or Thompson away from the ball, James Harden, he was clueless. He didn't know whether to flash out there or to stick with a man and switch. It was hard to watch, and Chris Paul actually fixed a lot of those errors that could have been catastrophic for the Rockets down the stretch. Despite all of that, I refuse to put this game up there with his performance against the Spurs last season in Game 6. Now, if you're looking at it just from a box score perspective, they're incredibly similar. But Harden checked out mentally in that game last year. In this game, he was fighting all the way. And I'll give him credit for that. And it's kind of funny that I have to give him credit for it, but it's a remarkable improvement from what we saw last year. And speaking of fighting, Chris Paul was tremendous in the second half. Once again, forget about the box score. The shots that he made were huge because it was when the offense was completely dead in the water. And also his defense was fantastic, as I was talking about before. This was, and you might laugh at this was one of his best games of his career. And you would only laugh at this, honestly, if you're just checking out the box score and you're just looking at highlights or you're reading on Reddit or wherever. But if you watch this game, he led his troops. There was no question about it, and they followed his lead. Now, speaking of big games and leadership, PJ Tucker delivered throughout the game on both sides of the ball. This was a pressure situation, and he stepped up big time. Now, I've got a question for you guys. How badly do you think Raptors fans are missing him right now? Also, Eric Gordon and Capella had big games. Now, it was interesting to see how much D'Antoni shortened his rotation. Everyone's going to talk about how well they played defensively and how that goes against D'Antoni. And his style, obviously, he wants to get as many shots as possible. But what was interesting to me is he only played 7 guys. And the Warriors, I was talking about it before the series started, the Warriors, they do not have the depth that the Rockets boast, but the Warriors played 9 guys. Well, technically they played 10, but Nick Young only played 1 minute, so I'm not going to include that. So the Warriors they played 9 guys as opposed to 7 guys for the Rockets. That was interesting to me. Now, despite the win and the series lead, the Rockets are now dealing with a potentially serious situation with Chris Paul's hamstring. The good news is he was still able to walk on it. Now, I'm not trying to diagnose him or anything like that. I wouldn't do anything that silly. But if he's able to walk on it, there's a good chance that it's not a tear, it's just a strain. Now, we could still see him miss Game 6 in Oracle and have him rest up for Game 7. That might be the smart thing to do. But in all honesty, This is the reality of the playoffs. And teams that make it this far, all teams that are remaining are dealing with this. The Celtics have Irving out with a knee injury, as well as, of course, Gordon Hayward, who has a broken ankle. They've also got other injuries with some more bench players. The Warriors obviously have Iggy, who has a bad knee. The Rockets now have Chris Paul, who has a suspect hamstring. And we have the Cavs, who have LeBron, who is tired. I'm trying my best not to laugh at that. Now, speaking of whom, I guess we should talk about Game 5 between the Cavs and Celtics. I deserve so much credit there for not cracking up laughing. Now, call me crazy, but I think at some point we've got to see at least one competitive game in this series. Of course, I'm referring to the Celtics and Cavs. This series seems destined to go 7 games, but it's the least compelling 7-game series I've ever seen in any sport, and that includes baseball and ice hockey. And as you might be able to tell, I'm somewhat disappointed, although it probably sounds like I'm about to laugh. I still can't believe I read out all these, the litany of injuries that teams are dealing with, and LeBron's, fatigue gets more attention than, all that other stuff. Anyway, I'll let it go. But yeah, as I was saying, as you might be able to tell, I'm a little bit disappointed with the Cavs and Celtics series so far. But I do not buy the whole LeBron is tired excuse, because people are throwing that at me like there's no tomorrow. If you looked at my inbox, you would see a lot of, well, what is this guy meant to do? Garbage. Let me explain something to you. And I almost feel like it's cliche that I have to say this, but fatigue is not an excuse. Fatigue does not give anyone a pass for lack of effort. Do we say that James Harden is tired after a bad shooting night? Of course not. No one gets that. It's an absolute cop-out. And do you know why it's BS? Because had he had played well, we wouldn't hear about it. But the media and his fans will stoop at any low to protect their guy, even if it means throwing his teammates under the bus, throwing his management under the bus, throwing the coach under the bus, and then making excuses about his body. Didn't we just hear, when there was talk about steroids, that he spends $1.5 million to get his body in tip-top shape? He might want to get a refund for it, because it's obviously broken. If he's fatigued this badly and no one else is fatigued, we don't hear the excuses for anybody else, why does he get that? Now, instead of sending me emails or leaving me comments saying that I'm a hater or whatever, prove me wrong. Who else gets that excuse for he's either out of shape or he played bad? Which one is it? Neither are good. But you can't use one as an excuse. We never gave it to Shaq. When Shaq was not in shape in 2003, I want to say, when they'll finally beat him by San Antonio. Now, you might think that that was controversial. Apparently it wasn't as bad as last week. Because when I was looking through my inbox, it was nothing but comments or questions regarding LeBron and Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant. So, I'm in a good mood. I don't know how long it's going to last, but let's get to some of these questions, and let's begin with, this is a good one. LeBron's durability is unprecedented. Your failure to appreciate him as a GOAT is a mental illness. Okay. I'm going to try to be nice here and answer the question, or the comment, or respond to it. LeBron's durability. He just played 82 games for the first time in his career. And because everybody likes to compare him to Michael Jordan, let's have a look at how many times Michael Jordan has played 82 games in his career. He did it as a rookie. He did it in the 86-87 season. He did it in the 89-90 season, the 1990 and 91 season. He did it in the 95-96 season. He did it in the 96-97 season. He did it in the 97-98 season. And he also did it in his final season in Washington when he was the age of 39 and 40. You want to tell me again how LeBron, at the age of 33, that this is unprecedented? I don't think so. Next question. Michael Jordan was 6'6" and 195 pounds. LeBron is 6'8" and 2000 that must have been a typo. But 270 pounds. Jordan has no chance one-on-one. Well, I guess if we're going by that, Oliver Miller Well, even Oliver Miller wouldn't have a chance because he's not 2,700 pounds. Oliver Miller was 6'9" and about 400 pounds, and I'm not exaggerating. So I guess if that's the only determining factor, then Oliver Miller's the greatest of all time, right? You know, I think I'm going to have fun with some of these questions today. I'm in such a good mood that it's kind of get me off track. Let's move along to some Kobe related questions. So I got a few of those this week as well. Is it fair to put asterisks next to Kobe's championships because he played with Shaq? I don't think it is fair, and the reason I will say that is we don't do that for Kareem. And what I mean by that is Kareem won all of his championships either with Oscar Robertson, albeit towards the tail end of his career, and Magic Johnson throughout the prime of Magic's career. Or maybe not the start of it, but keep in mind that Magic did win Finals MVP, and we'll get to the importance of Finals MVP in a minute, because there's a question about that. I just saw that. But he won all these titles with either Magic or Oscar Robertson. And nobody comes out and says, well, hold on a second, you know, Kareem won his titles with that. No, they say he won 6 titles. And it's even more damning when it comes to Kareem because, yes, you could say that Magic was a rookie for one of those titles, and Oscar Robertson was also winding down his career. But Kareem only, out of 6 titles, he only won Finals MVP twice. And as I said, I think that's pretty damning, especially when you look at the decade that was the 1970s. There wasn't one dominant team. Not one. In fact, I don't think there was a repeat champion at all in the 70s. I'll have to look that up, but I don't think there was. So there's really no excuse for Lou Alcindor or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of course his name was Lou Alcindor before he changed it, to have only won one title whilst playing alongside one of the greatest floor generals of all time in Oscar Robertson. And the point I'm making is nobody, when we bring up Kareem's name, do we say, well, he won 6 titles, but he won it with 2 of the top 15 players of all time, and one of them, who he won most of his championships with, is probably a top 3 or at least a top 4 player of all time. So I don't think it's fair to put asterisks next to Kobe's championships. The only one that I will be willing to put an asterisk next to is his very first one, because he was an all-star, but he wasn't a superstar. You could say that he was essentially a sidekick to him there, but that's the only one I'd be willing to listen to that argument. The next 2 championships, he was just as valuable. Maybe not on the offensive end in terms of scoring, but defensively on the perimeter, he was big time for them. You know, it was him that was guarding a lot of those players whilst putting up all those points. And he bottled his game up significantly so Shaq would have the dominant space on the court. And we saw that when Shaq was either in foul trouble or he was injured or he was just getting a rest, we saw Kobe getting that dominant position, and there wasn't really a whole lot of let up from the Lakers, especially in 2001. So I don't think that's fair at all to put the asterisk next to Kobe's championships. Even, you know what, I'm going to backtrack a little bit. I'm not even going to accept it for the first championship because he had such a big performance in Game 7, as well as against Portland, as well as Game 4 when Shaq fouled out. And this is when Kobe was coming back from the ankle injury. Jalen Rose has admitted that he stuck his foot underneath Kobe Bryant when he was shooting a jumper in Game 2. Virtually missed all of Game 2, missed all of Game 3. The Pacers were able to win Game 3, and they were on the verge of tying the series. In the 4th game, Kobe came back, had 28 points, whatever it was, and out-dueled Reggie Miller in Indiana to tie the series. Not to tie the series, to avoid the series being tied up and going up 3-1. So I'm not even going to accept the first championship having an asterisk next to it, let alone all 3 of them, sorry. Next question is, we can say that Jordan made Pippen better. LeBron has made many teammates better. I'm not saying that. But who has Kobe made better? For the sake of the question, I will answer it, but I will definitely dispute that LeBron has made a lot of his teammates better. But that's another question for another day. Who has Kobe made better? How about Pau Gasol? How about Trevor Ariza? How about Ron Artest? How about Andrew Bynum? There's so many players you could go through that didn't have championships on their resume until they played with Kobe Bryant. And Kobe took them to that next level. Now, you can say that Pau Gasol helped Kobe. Absolutely. All of them helped Kobe. But at the same time, Kobe took them to the next level. Pau Gasol hadn't even won one playoff game before playing alongside Kobe Bryant. And he had been in the league since 2002. So he'd been in the league for a while. Why is that just glossed over? It shouldn't be. But I guess it's trending now to just ignore everything that Kobe ever accomplished, right? Here we go. Here's the question I was referring to before. Finals MVPs don't mean anything. Iggy won it when, quote unquote, holding LeBron to 35, 14, and 9. I'm not sure if those numbers are correct. I know he did have a hell of a series. Of course, you're referring to the 2015 finals. I would have voted for LeBron being MVP in that series, by the way. But I have no issue whatsoever with Iguodala getting it. Because when you look at the shooting percentages that LeBron James had when Iguodala was guarding him, along with his own scoring output, despite being really the fourth or fifth option, because remember they had Harrison Barnes on that team too, and he was developing quite nicely into that role as being the third scorer behind Thompson and Curry. Iguodala, that was one of the more surprising finals MVPs, but just in terms of the fact that he never started any game prior to the finals that year. But it was well deserved. I didn't have an issue with that. But personally, I would have voted for LeBron, but it had very little to do with his numbers, by the way. Like, as impressive as that production is, had everything to do with the momentum shifts or the ability to control the pace of the game. That Warriors team essentially it was a very similar Warriors team to the one that won 73 ball games the next year. Of course, they lost in the finals, but it was very similar on paper in terms of talent. And LeBron was going up against them, and this is not an exaggeration, with Matthew Dellavedova and Timothy Mozgov as players starting in his starting lineup. And it's not like he had Kyrie Irving and Kevin Love alongside him as well. The next two guys starting alongside him were J.R. Smith and Tristan Thompson. So the fact that was even competitive is a feather in the cap of LeBron. And you guys said I couldn't say anything nice about him. Next question is, Jordan never had to face superstar teams, and when he did, he never beat them. He couldn't beat the Celtics or the Pistons, and he couldn't beat the Showtime Lakers until they were all out of their prime. Oh, really? Okay. Just let me get ready to answer this question. This question always comes up. No matter how many times I answer it, I still get this question over and over and over again. I'm not sure if there's like a meme circulated around on the internet that I haven't seen, but people seem to believe this as fact. The Celtics, I will agree with. He couldn't get over the top of them. But the Celtics had 5 Hall of Fame players, 5 of them. I'm not talking about potential Hall of Fame players, because you could argue that Draymond Green won't get in, although I think he probably will, because his resume will dictate that he gets in. But 5 Hall of Famers, this Warriors team only has 4 potential ones, unless if you say Iggy's going to be on there too, which I guess he might be. But they had 5 Hall of Famers. And it's one thing to lose to a team with 5 Hall of Famers if you have 2 Hall of Fame teammates alongside you. But it's another thing to lose when you have 0 Hall of Fame help. Do you know who Michael Jordan's top teammate was in terms of scoring in the 86 series? You know, the one that he got swept. He also got swept in 87 as well. But the one in 86 was Orlando Woodridge. In 87 it was Dave Corzine. Dave Corzine. And this is what's going to be thrown at him, like, oh, you didn't beat the Celtics because, well, I mean, of course he didn't beat the Celtics. But you know what? LeBron didn't beat this Warriors team with Durant either. He beat the other Warriors team, and that was after there was a plethora of injuries and a shady suspension that happened midway through the series. As for the Pistons were still, like, okay, you could say that they were probably tired after, 2 straight championships and a few long playoff runs. Do you want to have a guess at how old Isaiah Thomas was in 1991? Which was the year that the Bulls finally broke through? Isaiah was 29. Rodman was 29. Joe Dumars was 27. These are the Hall of Fame players. By the way, when people say that Jordan never went through a team with more than 2 Hall of Famers, that just flies completely in that argument's face. But that's how old they were. They were not that old. People think because Isaiah's career ended shortly after, a couple of years after, because of a torn Achilles, that he was, 34, 35 years old. And speaking of which, Jordan was 35 himself when they won their when the Bulls won their last title. But getting back to the question, what about the Lakers? Well, let's look at the age of the Lakers when they knocked them off in the 91 finals. Magic Johnson was 31. Still not super old. James Worthy was 29. Sam Perkins was 29. Came in the same year as Jordan. Byron Scott was 29. AC Green was 27. So don't tell me for 1 second that Jordan never had to play teams or couldn't beat teams until they got old. These teams weren't old. People just have that perception because Magic picked up AIDS, or HIV, I should say, just after the 91 finals, or not after the 91 finals, prior to the 91-92 season. We don't know when he actually contracted the virus. I'm assuming it wasn't long before it actually was found in his system, because they have to do all physicals and tests. That's part of being a professional athlete. But just because he retired shortly after doesn't mean he was approaching the end of his career. He still had a good 4 or 5 years left in him. So let's move it along a little bit and answer a different question. Who are my top 5 point guards of all time? Number one's not even close. It's Magic Johnson. You look at the resume, you looked at his style of play, just his brilliance. The only weakness he had was really perimeter defense, and everything else he was second to none. One of the greatest floor generals you'll ever see play basketball. People say that Michael Jordan's maybe the best leader of all time, and that is something I will dispute, because I think Michael Jordan's one of the best, I'm not even sure if this is a word, but one of the best doers. He goes out and he does things, he accomplishes things, and people will follow that lead. Magic empowered his players, his teammates, to do better, to be better than what they actually were. I don't think there's been a player in the history of the game, maybe Bill Russell, that has gotten more out of his teammates than what Magic Johnson did. Next, I've got Isaiah Thomas, back-to-back titles in the late 80s, early 90s. And that was at a time when really the Pistons had no right to even be a champion. It looked like it was setting up for Jordan. Jordan was just going to slide right in there after the Celtics dynasty of the 80s. But the Pistons, they had to force their way in, and they weren't giving an inch to anybody. And they were, of course, led by Isaiah Thomas. He was the heart and soul of that team. Number 3, I got Oscar Robertson, put up huge numbers. Didn't win a whole lot until he, played alongside Kareem. But, when you look at the impact he had on the game, he revolutionized the game in really being the first do-it-all player, at least from the perimeter. Number 4, I got John Stockton. He may be the best pure point guard of all time. Magic Johnson was great at rebounding, great at in having a variety of skills beyond what is essential to being a great point guard. You say the same about Oscar and Isaiah Thomas. John Stockton, his ability to pass the basketball and run an offense, may have been second to none from that position. And the fifth spot's a bit hard because there's a significant drop-off from those top 4 to number 5. I said after 2015, because I actually did the top 5 for each position of all time in 2015, and I said that Steph Curry was number 5. And I kind of want to take that back, because he has become more of a shooter. He doesn't really create. There were times in 2015 where he looked like he was developing into a nice little point guard. But with the emergence of Draymond Green, who really runs that offense, it's hard for me to really put Steph Curry as a true point guard. He's just a guard. So it's out of Walt Frazier, Jason Kidd, and Gary Payton. And I'm going to go with Jason Kidd because I think his game was a little bit more complete. Gary Payton was a fantastic defender, but maybe the best perimeter defender of all time. Forget just point guards. Clearly the best defensive point guard of all time. But maybe the best perimeter defender of all time, and that includes the likes of Scottie Pippen and Michael Jordan. But I'm going to go with Jason Kidd because he was a better rebounder. He had a couple of years where he probably should have been the league MVP. And then he won a championship in the twilight of his career, just like Gary Payton did. Gary Payton won it in Miami, and Jason Kidd won it back in Dallas, where his career started. So I'm gonna go Jason Kidd there. So the top 5 point guards of all time on my list is Magic, Isaiah, Oscar, Stockton, Jason Kidd. Last question I'm going to take on are my thoughts on the all-defensive selections. And some of them I agreed with, and some of them I didn't. Obviously, Anthony Davis, Rudy Gobert, and Drew Holiday, I've got no questions whatsoever. I think that they are all very well deserved. Robert Covington. Oh, wow. Just wow. He's a great shooter. He's not a bad defender, but this is just stat geeks going too far with this. No way should he be above Chris Paul or Paul George. Same can be said for Oladipo. Oladipo led the league in steals, I know that, but he wasn't a great defensive player. He just wasn't. And steals has never been a good barometer of a guy's impact on the defensive end. Case in point, Allen Iverson, he led the league in steals many times. I don't think he was ever All-NBA first-team defensive team in his career. That's just insane. So for Paul George and Chris Paul to both miss out, it kind of loses all legitimacy of that award. It doesn't mean all that much to me anymore. And whilst we're here, I may as well have a look at the 2018 All-NBA teams, although that's not the question, but I've got them right in front of me. So the All-NBA first team, James Harden, LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Damian Lillard, and Kevin Durant. The only guy I have an issue with is obviously Damian Lillard. I would have put Russell Westbrook in there. I know people scoff at that, but whatever. You take Russell Westbrook off that team, where I don't think they make the playoffs. I think Damian Lillard showed in the playoffs. Everyone wants to talk about Russell Westbrook's inefficiencies in the playoffs. Russell Westbrook at least showed up, and he wasn't the reason they lost in the playoffs. He was the reason it went 6. When you look at Damian Lillard, he was one of the big reasons they got swept to the Pelicans. The second team was Giannis, Westbrook obviously, Joel Embiid, LaMarcus Aldridge. I'm glad to see him back and getting consideration for some awards. And DeMar DeRozan. Don't really have any issue with any of those guys getting selected in those spots. And the third team is Steph Curry. Missed a lot of games, but I mean, when you've been at that level for that long, I guess that's to be excused. Oladipo, Karl Anthony Towns, Jimmy Butler, and Paul George. When I'm looking at this, I don't think I saw anyone from a team that did not make the playoffs. So that is good. I would have liked to see Chris Paul and Kyrie Irving get a little bit more consideration, but, somebody's got to miss out. So I guess when they miss so many games, it's hard to put them ahead of guys like Paul George. But anyway, guys, that is the episode for episode 68. We're approaching the 70 mark coming up. I hope you enjoyed the games. Hope you enjoyed the show, and I'll catch you in the next episode.